in a sense, this is kind of, I guess, a replacement for the bi-monthly webinars you all used to having. But there are some, interesting new things that have come up since the last time we spoke. But before we kick off with those updates, we wanted to be able to introduce you to our new director for intermodal project implementation. His name is Jason Osborne, and I will let him introduce himself to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Yeah, I've been a director for a month now. So at this point, I spend about an hour every day signing things, and hopefully that's helping move things along. That's my goal, is to make sure that those holes are filled and that we're moving things along. Before this, I was at Metro for 7.5 years, and that was a fun time. And before that, I was up in McHenry County, where I helped with their paratransit coordination back in those days. So I'm really happy to be here. I understand it's been a great day. I know it might look a little weird that we're doing this on Mardi Gras, but that's fine. Happy to celebrate with everybody. So nice meeting everybody. Look forward to working with you.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And as you can see, we're kind of gonna just cafeteria style here, let the team kind of come up and provide their updates in the order we're going to. Sean, unfortunately, was not able to join us this afternoon. And so Christian is going to be giving some updates that Sean wanted to be able to share with all of you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the spring conference. We really appreciate everybody being here. I have two quick updates from Sean Reese. Unfortunately, she won't be able to attend the conference today, but she does send her sincere apologies for not being here. So the first update is about IDOT's intention to visit each transit agency that is willing. We'll be reaching out to set up meetings soon. Unfortunately, it's going to take a bit longer than we expected, but we look forward to hearing and seeing all the great things that you guys are doing in your communities. The second update, it's about the Illinois Transit Innovations Forum. This forum will be a group made up of transit rural and urban agencies, as well as IDOT staff, to explore new technologies, new methods of training, joint projects, opportunities, and more to move the state forward together. If anyone's interested in being a member of this forum, please let me know. I'll be sitting in the IDOT room, and I'll be able to submit your name. Again, thank you very much for being here today. And thank you, Dave, and thank you, Mabel, for hosting the conference.
All right, good afternoon. Karen Robillard, Transit Capital Bureau Chief. Mackenzie just asked me to remind everyone that our Zoom participants that if you have questions during this session, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to those. I just have a couple of quick updates this afternoon. I want to start by just briefly touching on something that Christina mentioned this morning about purpose, and that in the transit industry, we often know what our purpose is and what drives us. From IDOT's perspective, a lot of the work we do is compliance, which isn't always the most exciting thing, but I think from the capital team's perspective, we want to reiterate how important it is that we're spending taxpayer funding in the most efficient and effective manner possible. So making sure we get the best value for our dollars. So if we're asking for additional information or things like that, just bear with us. That's our purpose and our goal. Another couple of items of business related to something that Laura mentioned this morning. The legislation that is going to exempt transit from GATA will not apply to capital projects that are not federally funded in any way. So for Rebuild Round 2, Rebuild, any of the other capital programs that we will have for now, GATA will still be required. So again, bear with us on that. But that means the UBT, which there's a capital version, the CBT, the capital budget template, and then the PRA, the typical process will be required for the capital project still. And one last thing, we did this last week host 2 trainings for all of the Rebuild Round 2 grantees, awardees. If your agency was not able to attend, that is going to be required. So you will have to watch the online recording and certify that you've taken that training. So please reach out to your your IDOT capital project manager if you didn't get the recordings by email already, because again, that will be required. And that is it. I'm gonna hand it over to Nick for CVP updates. Zoe Keller couldn't make it in person, but Nick is gonna provide some updates on our CVP program.
Hi, guys. I'm here on behalf of Zoe. She was able to give me some notes for you guys. First, she wanted to say that, hold on. The CVP application is coming out expected within the next 2 weeks. They're working on tying up the final loose ends. Virtual training classes will be announced once the application is open. Partners should apply for as many vehicles as they need. IDOT will fund as many vehicles as funding allows. And if you're unsure as to whether your vehicle has already been replaced, please contact Zoe or Jeff to verify before submitting your application. And then Zoe wanted me to respond, also give you an update on vehicle contracts and orders. All vehicle contracts are being rebid due to significant inflation. Hold on, there we go. Once new contracts are in place, we will inform partners so that they may replace orders if they have rebuild projects or locally funded purchases to make. Once the standard contracts are reestablished, IDOT intends to go out to bid for a Ford Transit style bus as an alternate option. Vendors anticipate at least 18 months from order to delivery due to supply chain shortages. That's it. So if you have any questions, go ahead and we can try to either answer them ourselves or we can contact Zoe during this meeting and get answers for you. Thanks.
Yeah, so the question was whether or not we're looking at alternative fuel vehicles through the CVP contract. At this point, not right now. The Lono application that we'd put in last year unfortunately wasn't awarded by the FTA. There will be future rounds of Lono FTA applications that we hope to be able to go after. But right now the focus is on getting just a standard CVP, both the contracts for the vendors on our end in place and then the awards out so that we can get that federal money to all, or federal resources to all of you. As Nick mentioned, we are looking at a Ford Transit option that will be a little bit different than one of our, our current vehicles for the medium duty. But this round, we won't be asking for you to identify whether that would work for you. So we're not quite there yet. We don't have a contract in place for those, but it is something we're looking at and hoping to have more options in the future.
The only other, excuse me, the only other quick thing too, one of our partner state DOTs in Michigan is in the process of going out to RFP for a battery electric cutaway, which any of our partners, including us at IDOT, will eventually be able to piggyback off of if we want to. So even though we don't have like an immediate plan in place at this time, we are hoping, whether it's through a future round of Lono or even if we might do our own initiative, that we will be trying to expand in that space sooner than later. But obviously with everything else going on right now and just trying to get, the baseline stuff moving forward, we chose to focus on that first. But that is a really, really good question.
Yeah, we were hoping to reach an agreement with our vendors where we would, have some kind of inflation-based adjustment, but within what was allowed in our current contract, and that's not going to work for them because, as Nick mentioned, we're being asked for 30% increases, which budgets can't withstand anyways. A lot of our rebuild projects, we had vehicles budgeted under prior contract amounts, and so that really hurts us as well, given the funding that is available. We are currently working to do the 30-day notice of contract termination, and then we'll go back out to bid. So we're hoping that it's a 6-month, max bid process, but we have to go through procurement, so. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So the part of the reason we're rolling out the CVP application now before we have that contract renegotiated is so that we're ready to go as soon as that contract's in place. And that's essentially when you'll already have been notified about your awards under the CVP call for projects if you apply. But we will, of course, then also let you know when to expect those vehicles. But I would say there's probably no chance it's before the fall, unfortunately. And that's just due to a number of different circumstances. Do talk to Jeff, because I know, occasionally there are agencies that have vehicles that are a little bit older, but, still useful, and, we can reallocate those if you're in desperate need of a new vehicle. Yep, and, obviously the delays due to COVID and other things going on in the world, we would love to be able to control, but can't. So we're doing our best to make sure that that contract is in place and that we get moving and have, again, like I said, all the projects queued up through the CVP call for projects. Yep.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Glenn Gresh, Section Chief down here in Springfield. I'm gonna talk a little bit about operations. I want to talk about a little bit about what Gene said today, which was, hey, we're in this together, okay? We're a team. We're gonna give you money, and we want to give you money, but we need the paperwork and all the other requirements, the GATA stuff filled out correctly, okay? So we can give you that money on time and even earlier than what you expect. So now, one thing though that Dave did say was Gene was a good person. I don't know about, I've been on the other end of some of those conversations, so I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so we are a team. Okay, so let's talk about currently, we're going to be going in another month, coming into our last quarter of the fiscal year for us. For those that do advances, this is the time we really take a really hard look at what you do, what your actuals are, and compare your actuals to your advances. We don't want to go over and overspend at the end of the year, so we take a real hard look at that. And I get my project managers really might have to reach out to you to question why you're requesting an advance that's quite a bit more than what you've actually have shown in the past. So we'll take a look at that. But we're coming down to the end, and now as things keep rolling, our DOPE and 5311 applications are out there. They're due in April, so we're going to process those as quickly as we can. We've got a new director now. Things are going to go a little bit more speedy with the approvals for that. For DOPE, as you remember, they're not going to fall under the strict GATA requirements. So some of the paperwork that you have to do for that is not, but we still need a budget that's going to be attached to the application. So once that application is approved through me, then it goes to IDOT GATA group in the business services. They're going to look at that at your budget to make sure that it's correct. Okay, especially those that are doing indirect costs. Okay, we get they return a lot of your budgets that have indirect costs because they're incorrectly done, and we're trying to get more knowledge on indirect costs to you and through us to make sure that there's no back and forth for that. But they're still going to take a look at that. So that's coming. So you get those applications done, you submit it to your project manager. We'll do a quick turnaround through me, and then get your contracts going. Okay, we want to get that done quickly so that you can get paid quickly come July. Emergency funds can be used for capital. I've talked about those at the last conference. So those that want to use the CARES and the other funding for capital projects, okay, talk to your project manager and see, because we've got a mechanism to use. It's not going to be for rolling stock. It's going to be things that are going to be emergency type of things. So talk to your project manager and we can get those approved, but let's not leave any money on the table here, okay? And again, we're not pushing you to do that. If you think you're going to use that for operations, all your CARES money and all your other emergency funding, perfect. You've got a plan. So let's use it. Let's use it here in the next couple of years, whatever, so we don't have to lose it. Okay, a couple of things that have come up in conversation. The big question that I always get is, can CARES be used for match? The answer to that is no. Okay, you've got your other mechanisms for match, and we keep pushing, and we're going to keep pushing to have the PCOMs really more involved in what's going on with your operations. Okay, so, and a lot of times the grantee, the county, if they've got if they have a transportation group that does the transportation, sometimes they push that down to the transportation group to do all the paperwork and all that. We want the grantees to be involved in that, at least to know what's going on and to push that to do. So anyway, that's all I got. Any questions? Thanks a lot.
Sorry, I just wanted to make one more announcement. We were just notified in the last couple of weeks that late filing affidavits now will need wet signatures. They'll have to be sent by snail mail from you to our 69 West Washington, Chicago office for Jason's signature, and then down to comptroller. So if you have particular rebuild round 1 capital agreements that are due to expire soon, expect your IDOT project manager to reach out, but also please be watching those because we want to avoid having to do late filing affidavits at all costs. It's going to be an even longer process, unfortunately. And there's nothing we can do about that. So we're gonna track that, but also be watching and help us make sure we don't have grant terms expire.
All right, now you get to hear from me again. Your favorite person, I know, right? Just wanted to build on a couple of things Glenn mentioned too, specifically with your flexibility applications for using your emergency relief funding. To this point, we've only received 3 submissions, which is okay, from partners. We know that there's a number of folks who are continuing to ask questions, needing some clarification as you build out your request. And some folks just, we're planning to wait closer to the deadline to turn those in. As a reminder, April 1st is a deadline for your flexibility applications, the same date as your annual 5311 and DOPE requests. We politely ask you that if you're able to get your flexibility applications in, if that's something you're wanting to do, that you please submit those to us in advance. It'll allow our team to start looking at what you've proposed and start identifying if there's any additional information we might need from you before we have to start looking at the annual applications, which Glenn said is quite the process for us. So just wanted to bring that up. The other quick reminder there too, for the folks that had already turned their stuff into us, you may have already heard back from us regarding the budget. So when you're asking us to fund something, a capital expense, with the best of your ability, we ask that you do some homework on what you anticipate the cost being, the actual expense. So instead of just telling us, it's going to be X number of dollars, if you have something that kind of supports, whether you went online and did some research or maybe you reached out to a few firms that work in that space and asked them to just give you a high-level quote, something that helps us confirm that the numbers that you're proposing are based in current day reality, especially with inflation being what it is right now. Expenses or prices for things that we may have all assumed were one way a few months ago are now going to be very different. So I just wanted to mention those 2 quick things. The next thing I wanted to address, what we're looking at on the operations side for fiscal year 23. Hopefully at this point, most of the partners are feeling pretty comfortable with the application process in Black Hat and the budget summary reporting process in Black Hat as well. We're hoping to, our intention is, as we move into state fiscal year 23, by the end of Q1, all the other reporting stuff that you have to do for your operations program will also be in Black Hat. So that means any of the data reports, any of the form reports, all of that's going to now be funneled through one place in Black Hat. It'll look actually probably very similar to what you're used to seeing with the budget summary reports. This will help us keep better track of things. It'll help you know that there's only one place you have to worry about now instead of potentially multiple places to upload stuff. And just like I said, help the department do a better job of maintaining oversight of what's being submitted and where. So that's something that we're really looking forward to, and it'll be a big lift for us concurrently with the application review process as we head through the spring and into the summer as well. Another thing I wanted to quickly touch base on, obviously, as you look around in the room today, no more face coverings, right? And so with the state having released its mandate as of yesterday, just wanted to remind everybody that even though the state of Illinois mask mandates have changed, at the federal level, FTA still expects that each recipient who's receiving 5311 funding should still be making every effort to enforce mask wearing on your system, right? So anybody riding the vehicle, you should be making whatever effort you feel comfortable doing to continue to ask folks to have face coverings while they're driving or riding in your vehicles. We understand that this is a difficult task, and that as things start to transition, you're gonna have riders that are gonna be frustrated, and we respect the fact that there's only so much you can do, and you've got other things to focus on. So I'm sharing this with all of you because this is something that likely your passengers are gonna be frustrated by. They're gonna ask, well, wait a minute, why is the state of Illinois doing this? And you're telling me I still have to wear it on this, on my trip. We understand you gotta work with what you got. You're not, law enforcement officers. And so just wanted to share that with you all, but make sure that nuance was made clear today. I also wanted to just briefly give a high-level overview of the results of a survey we put out a few weeks ago, asking every one of the rural partners to kind of share how they were using transit management software and also potentially any surveillance or camera systems at your facilities. And so I'm just going to share with you again some high-level numbers you might find interesting. The reason we specifically were asking about transit management software, at this point in time, we've kind of looked at where the field of partners are, and what we discovered that we're not yet to 100% uptake in using transit management software for things like route scheduling, but that's something that we really want to push all of the partners to do, and our goal is that we have everybody on a path towards that end sometime by the end of the calendar year. So for those of you that don't currently have a transit management software system to help with things like route scheduling, we know that a handful of you are already in the process of going through a procurement phase. We know others of you that haven't started in that space yet have indicated that you're looking to move there already. So that's good news. But also wanted to take this opportunity just to let everybody know, if you are one of our partners that isn't currently in that space, we're going to start pushing more aggressively to get everybody to do uptake in the route scheduling field. What we've heard from all of our partners that already have route scheduling software is that it makes their life immensely more easy. It's also helpful for us at the state level when we need to look at things like, trip denials, right? Obviously right now, especially with staffing issues, a lot of our partners are feeling the brunt of people needing to get trips, and maybe it's too difficult to really figure out how to schedule all of those just because the volume is greater than the supply. And so being able to get track at a granular level who you're supporting, how you're supporting them. If you're unable to support everybody, what does that look like? It's all about accountability and our ability at the state level to try to find new ways to help figure out where need is and try to meet need as much as possible. The other quick notes from the transit management survey. We noted that most all of you are using one of 4 different transit management systems. And so, it seems just by looking at it that the field of options or interest at least kind of is consolidated. And within that as well, there's a couple of them that are used far more than the others. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe it's not so interesting to you, but that was one thing else that we noted, that it seems like most all the partners are kind of gravitating towards a certain set of transit management software providers. So CTS, EcoLane, and I just forgot the other 2, I apologize, but probably names that you're all very familiar with, and I can, if you want to touch base with me later, I'll share you the specific details as well. The other thing we had asked about was contactless fare payment, and any of our partners who were using transit management software or infrastructure to support that role as well. Obviously, for a lot of our partners who do just demand response, the way you already collect payments different than if you had a deviated fixed route or fixed route system. Though some of our partners who do both urban and rural service have been experiencing that for some time. When we asked about that particular piece, 10 out of the 43 partners that received 5311 funds from us indicated that they are currently using some form of contactless fare payment. Again, that particular piece is not anything we are mandating, though I would encourage you to consider, if you've got free emergency relief funding still available, being able to use some of that to support what you're doing and provide new options for your ridership as well. And then lastly, when we talked about security systems or security cameras, 17 of the 43 partners had indicated that they are already using some version of cameras, whether that be on buses or looking over parking lots or inside facilities. And then another 11 partners indicated that they were in the process of putting out procurements or were intending to ask us for funding through their emergency relief flexibility that we talked about a moment ago to do that. So again, those last two pieces certainly are not things that we are expecting you to implement, but they were the reason we asked those questions in the survey, and now I'm sharing it with you here is, again, as you're taking time to think about what remaining amount of emergency relief funding that you have, and if you feel as though it would be in your best interest to start focusing on using some of those funds for things other than operations, these are some of the areas that we thought might most benefit the partners. And by asking these questions and then sharing the results with you today, might spark additional interest in doing so. And or if you have additional questions, you can reach out to us and we'll help answer any questions. And if you want specific details, we can try to connect you with other partners that are already in the space so they can tell you their experience and give you pointers and maybe avoid landmines, as Gene had mentioned earlier this morning. All right, so that's all I wanted to share about the transit management survey. A few other things, and then I promise I'll be done, and any questions we'll take at the end. So we talked with one of our colleagues, Chuck Abraham, who is kind of in charge of transit planning studies at IDOT, and I'd asked him if he had anything he'd like to share with folks, any high-level information about what we're doing in the planning sphere within intermodal project implementation. And Chuck shared this with me. We currently have 35 ongoing planning studies throughout the state, covering both urban and rural areas, and sometimes the integration of service between the two. And those studies can usually last anywhere from 1 year to 3 years. And so of those 35 studies, we'll see them kind of waxing and waning at different times. The other thing I wanted to make sure you all were aware of, in case you didn't already know this and you had ideas of things you might like to ask for, we actually have a NOFO currently open for new planning studies. So we're inviting folks to put in suggestions for new things for us to do planning studies on. That is open through March 8th. And so again, if that's something that interests you, reach out to one of the members of our IDOT team. We can try to help provide you any information you need, including if you want a link to the actual NOFO page where you can submit a recommendation or a request. The last thing I was going to note on here as well is we have an intercity bus study that's going on at IDOT. That both intermodal project implementation as well as our Office of Planning and Programming at IDOT have been undergoing for a few years. This study was launched at the beginning of the pandemic, and so some of the data we hoped to glean from this process, both in doing interviews with folks and then also just raw data, has obviously been kind of bungled up, I guess is the way I'll put it, right? The reality of life has made it more difficult than we anticipated. And so as part of that outcome, the entity we were partnering with in doing that study has had to try to approach the analysis portion of that study in a different light. So we are working to get that wrapped up and hope to have that information available for the department to use as we consider where opportunities exist as we move forward in the future for intercity bus services throughout the state of Illinois. Just a couple last quick things that I wanted to build upon as well that our team had been hearing from those of you, some of the things that are more reoccurring. As a reminder to folks, and this is probably more important this year, when you're going to do budget summary reporting specifically for your DOT program, you'll notice that there's a little box at the very bottom that says local match. That is where you tell us, once you've run out of 5311 funding to meet your match requirement, that's where you can attest to the department what amount of local match funding, whether it's coming from your PTA account or if it's another source of revenue that you're routing through there before it hits your PTA account, that you're using to help cover the other 35% of the match requirement for the DOPE program. So that's something that a lot of folks have been asking about. And so if you have further questions, you can reach out to your project manager on the operations side and ask them if you have any questions there. And then one last thing just to kind of note here, just keep in mind as we're entering the operations application cycle for this year, or now we're kind of midway through it, certain documents take longer to get processed, right? So obviously, going in front of your board, your local boards to get approval to submit applications for federal funding, you got to get that on the docket in advance. And so especially for our newer partners, some of the folks who may not have been through this process before, don't wait till the last minute. And honestly, at this point too, if you don't already have it on your minutes or your agenda for a March meeting, you're probably not going to have your 5311 application ready in time to submit with everything that's necessary by the April 1 deadline. Of course, as all of you know, the April 1 deadline is not a hard, fast date. So we do accept applications after that point. But just wanted to remind everybody that, to be thinking about what you need to have accomplished, and if certain activities take longer, try to work as far out in the future to get that done as you can. All right, I am done talking. It looks like 1:49. So are there any other questions that the room has first for any of us regarding state programs? Oh, yes. That is a good and touchy question, but I will answer it. So we currently, through our last state management review process that we at IDOT had to do, one of the findings we actually got as a department is that we were delinquent in our responsiveness to DBE requirements. And so we are working right now with our program office at the department to one, identify all of the immediate stopgap measures we need to take. And two, we've had some transition in staff. And I think probably all of you have experienced in this different ways as well. Folks who have, been working probably long past when their retirement eligible age have decided, this is a time that they're ready to take a rest. And so we're also looking to try to staff back up the office within the department that's responsible for helping us prepare for some of that stuff. But to your question specifically too, one of the things we're wanting to do, or at least look at potentially doing, is right now where for transit specifically, we share the same set of goals and requirements that the state is looking to try to achieve for DBE goals, which is primarily focused on the highway side, right? Because that's where most of the money and most of the stuff is. But we're looking to potentially break out and do a transit specific set of goals to better meet what we think is realistic. And then obviously as part of that too, we will have to go back and do a new disparity study because it has been a while since that's happened. That's a good question. What other questions do you all have? Anything else? Yes.
Kenzie reminded me of two more things while people think about any other questions they might have. We had on our trainings last week announced that the application in Black Cat for Rebuild Round 2 projects, and I say application because obviously the awards have already been announced, but if you were awarded a project, you need to go through Black Cat. We had said that would be open today. Nick and I are going to be working on it this afternoon. It's not up yet. We've had a couple of questions for anybody, you overachievers who are already trying to get in. It'll be up later today or first thing tomorrow. And then we also have round 3 for Rebuild. We plan to announce this late spring, early summer. So for any of the projects that Mackenzie was talking about, security systems, things like that, keep Rebuild round 3 in mind and please apply.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions? No? Mabel, do you know if we got any chat? No? All right, that's okay. I guess it means either we're very boring or we're just really good at explaining things. And I don't think the second one is probably always true, but I think we're trying to do that as best as we can. And just a reminder to everybody too, we are making ourselves available in the Topaz room during the conference. So some of you have already asked for one-on-one conversations, but otherwise, if you just want to kind of walk on by and see if somebody's free, if you have any specific questions, we can try to help you with that, even if it's related to Black Cat or where's the payment at, where's my budget summary approval at, don't hesitate to ask. And with that, we're done. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Hope everybody got some good notes. Let's see, we're pretty much right on time. A couple weeks ago, I got a call from Shelley Richardson, and she's the executive director of the state Illinois State Independent Living Center. And the SILC, as it's called, has had a long relationship with RTAC and with HSTP coordinators, and has done some really good work bringing together groups of people that would not have been brought together before. And Shelley asked for some time here to talk about the importance of rural transportation to her consumers and the consumers all over the state who live in independent living centers. And I think she also has some testimonials for us. So Shelley and anyone else from SILC who you would like to have come up here, that would be great. I also have a quick note. Mackenzie was talking about the TMS survey, and we are going to be doing a survey also from RTAC in the next week or two, a salary survey. I've never done one for here. The last one was from 2017, and there is quite a lot of interest to have updated salary and wage data, and actually benefits. There's, as everybody knows, one of the issues we've had now for a couple of years is we don't have enough drivers and staff to work. So people are poaching drivers, and CDLs especially are pretty critical. So there's a lot of interest in having updated data. So when you get that, we'd really appreciate answers from everybody. It's going to be a little more in depth than the ones we've had in the past. We want to be able to parse this data down to not just what a dispatcher makes anywhere in the state, but a dispatcher by type of transit provider in rural Illinois. For instance, if you're a transit district or a multi-county transit agency or a single county or a city, we'll try to keep all that separate so it's of greater use to everybody. So keep your eye out for that. You can stay seated if you want, Shelley. Matt, I don't know if this mic is working here.
All right, well, thanks, Dave. And yeah, I prefer to stay seated because I'm old. So my name is Shelley Richardson. I'm the director of the statewide Independent Living Council here in Illinois. My role as the director is to work with the 22 Centers for Independent Living and other agencies, nonprofits and state agencies that help people with disabilities. We write a state plan that mainly focuses on the areas of improving employment opportunities, housing, and transportation across the state. SILC also offers a lot of trainings. We do a lot of what I'm doing today. We speak to legislators. We try to help all that we can for our people with disabilities in any way we can. I want to tell you I appreciate your time today. I appreciate that you have taken the time to stay here and listen. Oh, okay. All right. I'm also very short. So anyway, it's an honor to have you listen to us today. I would like to talk about some problems that we're facing across the state in our area of transportation. I know that we all are working toward the same goal. We want to help people get to where they need to be. So I'm first going to open by reading a statement from the Illinois Network of Centers for Independent Living. The Illinois Network, like I said, is made up of 22 centers for independent living, And they all come together. Each director is a board member of the Illinois Network of Centers for Independent Living. So they couldn't be here today because this was their board meeting they had, but I'm going to read a statement on their behalf. The following issues affect Illinoisans with disabilities as well as seniors and other low to medium income households. There is a lack of evening and weekend transportation for employment, shopping, entertainment, and medical visits, even visits to the emergency rooms and weekend clinics. There is no or limited transportation in rural areas of the state. And it's also, it's better in the suburban areas, but if you get to the towns outside of the suburban areas, and I digress from what I was reading, it gets worse to get transportation out into further communities. There is limited service in rural communities for things such as shopping, entertainment, and medical activities, and this forces citizens to travel between counties to access such services. Many counties have either no mechanism for intra-county transportation, or those that do are often not operated in a smooth manner. There is extreme lack of dependable medical transportation, especially with managed care organizations. Many times they do not show up or show up in a vehicle that is not accessible for a person with a disability. INSIL and the 22 members across Illinois are willing to work with IDOT and public transportation providers to resolve this very serious issue for Illinoisans with disabilities and other low-income individuals and seniors. Now, I want to make some remarks on behalf of my agency, the Statewide Independent Living Council. I have narrowed the problems down to 4 main areas, and I want to talk to you about it, and we want to work with you to see what we can do about it. First of all, we have a lack of dependable medical transportation from the managed care organizations. You are going to find that what I have to say mirrors exactly what INSIL said. The reason we need this dependable transportation is many times people are trying to stay out of a nursing home. They depend on this medical transportation to get to their specialist care. Many of them, and especially those of us in the aging population, we have more acute medical needs. And when the transportation isn't there to get us to where we need to go, it could even be as serious to cause death. So the next area that we talked about is lack of evening and weekend hours. Now, the problem with not having evening hours is that people with disabilities that want to work, they can't take an evening shift. They're very limited as to what kind of employment that they can have access to. Also on the weekends, I don't know how you feel, but I know it's very important for most people to be able to go to their house of worship and to congregate with the members of those places. Also, it is important for our own peace of mind and state of mind to be able to get out into our communities and enjoy shopping and other activities that all other people that are able to drive can access. There's also a lack of transportation options in rural areas. I know I'm not telling you anything new, but I will tell you it's very difficult for 10 years, I helped move people out of nursing facilities back into the community. And a lot of the problem that I had was they were going back to a rural community where their family was, but their family members were working and they couldn't get them to medical transportation. So it was a really hard sell. And unfortunately, some of them, because they wanted to live close to their family, they couldn't get the transportation. They ended up back in the nursing facility for that reason. And then the last issue I want to talk to you about is the lack of the ability to smoothly travel across county lines. As you know, many of you have maybe doctors in a different county. Maybe you work in a different county from where you live, but it is very hard to get that smooth transfer between counties, especially if it's, I'm not necessarily talking about a fixed route situation, but making those transfers between the door-to-door or curb-to-curb service, or like the paratransit service. Just trying to get across the county line is very difficult, and again, presents all kinds of barriers. On the flip side, I wanted to make you aware that Ed Heflin and I just recorded last Thursday a video, The Basics of Riding the Bus. And this is for any consumer that contacts their Center for Independent Living, and it just walks them step by step through that. We have 2 other videos that will be recorded in April. The first one we will be talking about paratransit services, and the last video will be the door-to-door service, on-demand service. So we also are working with our consumers. But we really need you to know that the problems are very, very serious. And any way that we can help you, we would love to assist you. And right now, I want to turn it over to Eric Brown and Conan Calhoun. They're going to introduce themselves and tell you they are from their 2 different centers for independent living in 2 different geographical areas. And they can tell you some more personal experiences that they've been having.
Thank you, Shelley. This is Conan Calhoun. I'm the disability rights advocate at Life Center for Independent Living, which is out of Bloomington. We serve Ford, Livingston, McLean, and DeWitt counties. And I'll bring it over here to Eric real quick.
I'm Eric Brown. I'm the Education and Advocacy Coordinator at Ramp Center for Independent Living. We cover Winnebago, Boone, DeKalb, and Stevenson County in the northern part of the state.
And so I think some of the aspects that we're going to probably talk to all of you about today, and we're really wanting to make sure that you're hearing it from a standpoint of not just an advocate, but bringing these concerns from the individuals that have disabilities, that are living in these communities, that are living in these counties. I think it's really important to put that distinction out there, because a lot of times it's really difficult to be able to bring the consumers into this facility and to be able to do that. So when we're breaking this down today, the lack of dependable medical transport when it's dealing with MCOs is a direct reflection. A lot of times we've got independent living advocates in, let's say, Pontiac, Illinois, that's personally experiencing some of these concerns where the transport has been set up, and then all of a sudden here comes the day for the appointment, and then the provider, that transport provider, doesn't show up. There's no indicator that they're not going to show up. When they do show up, they're in a vehicle that's inaccessible, or they just don't even show up at all. That happens time in and time out, quite a bit in a lot of those rural areas that we're working through. That's just one person that's happening to, when we know that it's happening to a multitude of individuals. And then Eric's going to share his as well.
Yeah, I think in addition to what all of the things that Conan said are true, I think the other thing that folks run into when we talk to the other centers for independent living are transportation providers who do not take Medicaid rides. That don't have a relationship yet to be able to do that, and the barriers that causes. A lot of us will think about, if the ride is $3 each way, that's probably not a big deal. That's not, something that's going to break our bank. But for some of our consumers, that's a lot. So, we have people reaching out saying, hey, I heard that my transportation provider is getting close to getting Medicaid rides, but they're not there yet. What can you do as a Center for Independent Living to help them move to that point to where they're able to accept those rides? And we're hearing the barriers first. So, and I'll probably say this a couple of times throughout, but if you don't have relationships with your local Center for Independent Living, you're missing out on a lot of information from the disability community. Disability community is 25% of the population. So if you don't have those relationships, we're getting those concerns. And I can tell you, and the transportation providers in my local area that I have relationships with, those things are much smoother, because I can get a concern from a consumer. I can reach directly out to the transportation provider and say, hey, this is an issue. How do we correct it? And we can get it done. In those situations where those relationships don't exist, then you're having the advocate having to go research how to get it done and develop those relationships. It's really important for all of you to have those relationships now, build those relationships, and move things forward. Because the barriers that we're talking about are difficult, but things that can be solved.
And definitely they could be solved. I want to give a shout out because we've got our provider up there that is just knocking the door down, and that's Showbus. Moving heaven and earth and whatever the case may be. I just want to make sure that I give that shout out real quick. The lack of rural transportation when we're looking at just only having a single provider is one aspect to that. But if we're looking at multimodal options, we're looking at Uber, we're looking at Lyft, we're looking at possible faith in action. Almost every single one of those coming across the board, not accessible vehicles. None of them. And some of them, you actually have it in their own writing that they're probably never going to get accessible vehicles for transportation options. So right from the get-go, we're already set up, there's a huge barrier right there. But we know there's an extreme need out there. And how are we going to get to a point where the policy that's driving all of us and the practice in which it's being done is going to make that transaction or that transition, that intersection where it's all happening, where it can actually, it's like we're moving in a direction to where, okay, we know the concerns are out there, and how are we going to make that mind shift of how we're going to fix this problem? I think there's a lot of talent. I think there's a lot of capabilities to be able to do it, but we're really just not getting down into the actual nuts and bolts yet. And so that was a multimodal approach to it, is that even when we're relying on other systems to be able to get us there, we're still hit with another barrier, which is now we don't have a vehicle that can actually pull it off.
And some of those other systems are not accessible. I know I've heard from transportation folks that, if we can't do it, Uber can. Google the disability community in Uber. There's a lot of disability organizations that are suing Uber around accessibility, right? It's because they're not accessible. Countywide transportation in all places would solve a lot of problems. I live in and work in Rockford. Great area for transportation if you are someone who lives in that city. But if you were trying to maneuver from that city to any of the small cities around us, you may run into some issues. There are some pockets in our community that are not covered, where someone lives just outside of the range for paratransit, or just far enough that they can't make it themselves to that bus stop. Really, I think thinking about that too, like I've had consumers before that live literally a block away from the stop, but it's just too far, and they're not qualifying for paratransit then, or they're not able to then get to that bus stop. So really thinking about your policies and tying them around the needs of folks with disabilities, really looking at those reasonable accommodation processes. And we recognize that you all have policy that you have to follow, and things that you're given requirements, but really looking at what do the people that I'm serving need, and what are some things that I can do to meet those needs that wouldn't make me have to violate any sort of policy. Again, the more transportation options we have, the more accessible they are, the more you're including the disability community in those decisions. I think the less you will hear concerns like this as we move forward.
This other concern that that's kind of has been brought to the forefront, something that I actively was engaged in, have been in it for years already, is our transit system that was in the Bloomington Normal area. We actively have a plan right now. This is not a dig towards any of those. Is that we designed a bus system, and we had the routes planned, and we're going through putting where the actual bus stops are going to be, and then the routes just took off. We had roughly 75 to 85% of the bus stops that were inaccessible at the actual physical bus stop. They had some existing infrastructure built in because of the provider before, but the routes drastically changed. So when we started looking at that, is what did the paratransit look like? What was the ridership looking like on the paratransit side? And it was drastic. It was forcing individuals that could not get to the fixed stop because of the inaccessibility going into the paratransit, which then creates more barriers because now you're going through a process of being able to get accepted onto that paratransit. So there were, that in itself is a systems piece, is that we went through the idea of building up the whole system. And then we got to where we were actually having to pick up the riders, the part that makes the transit system work, it was inaccessible. I don't know how we got that far into the process without recognizing that was an actual problem. And so, but that now, that there's a plan, and we have year 2024, and be ensured that we are going to be able to have all of our bus stops within Bloomington Normal on Connect Transit to be accessible by that time frame. And we're actively achieving that. But that's a lot of work between the town and the city, built up infrastructure, and making sure that the connectivity is there. So that's one on that mass transit side.
Well, and I think, Conan, to your point, we recognize that some of that inaccessibility is outside of your control, right? We know that you all are not in charge of the built environment in a community, but would encourage, as you're starting to look at where do I place bus stops or what's the route, look at that accessibility, really consider what would someone with a disability have to do to get from point A to point B? And if you're going to put it on a route that maybe isn't the most accessible, consider putting a different route or have a conversation with your local city or county to say, what can we do to make this route more accessible? I have the privilege of being able to drive, and I drive to work every day. And I see people in our streets walking to the bus stop because there's not a sidewalk. And I'm not saying that that is the fault of my transportation provider, but someone placed the bus stop. And there wasn't a conversation about what is the accessible route to this bus stop and how does someone get there safely. So really looking at where you're placing them, and again, if they're in a place that's not accessible, if they're in a place that looks like it might be tough for someone with any sort of disability to get to, call your local Center for Independent Living and have a conversation about ways to fix that. Call your city and have a conversation about ways to fix that.
Some other aspects that have shown up, and I think Shelley had spoke on this earlier, was the actual times of service. The 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Those hour gaps between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. And then there's no service orientation later in the evening for those who might be working third shift. That 24-hour period where you're actually having to plan your day for one trip for the next day, if that's where you want to go, is if it's a 9 a.m. doctor's visit in the morning, what's that going to look like? I might have to get there I might be planning my trip at 7:15 to arrive at 7:45, but now I'm going to be sitting there until 9 o'clock. And then what does it look like to be able to get that medical appointment achieved and then possibly getting on the next ride to be able to get out of there, and it's looking like it's noon. And then I had a doctor's appointment. So my day started at 7:15 in the morning just to get the one appointment. I personally don't have to go through a lot of those things, but I've been with my consumers and mirrored right along them and going, we only got one thing done. We still have the rest of the day to do other things. We got to try to get other things done. And they're like, that's not going to happen. I don't have another transportation aligned for that day. So that 24-hour setup time can be really, really challenging for an average person, let alone a lot of other complex things that may be coming down the avenue.
And I think we recognize too that, if someone calls on a Monday and wants a ride on Friday on paratransit, you all probably don't set that schedule until Thursday night. So I recognize that there might be, a window that you give someone. We can arrive between 1 and 3, or, you're giving them a window. I would encourage with that window that you're also explaining to that person, if you call the night before, or the day before, we can probably give you a better window. I can tell you many of my consumers who, if they have a 1 o'clock appointment, will set their ride for 2 hours earlier so they can make sure they get there. And I've told them, because I've talked to the transportation provider, they've told me if you call the day of, they'll give you a window. but that trust isn't there with the transportation provider. So being clear that, yes, we have to give you a window. Maybe we haven't set the rides up yet. We don't know where everything's going to fall. But letting them know, if you call back before your ride, we can give you a better window so you're not having to wait. I had somebody who needed to come to my office at 1 o'clock in the afternoon a couple weeks ago, and they set their ride up for 11 a.m. so that they would come on time. So they arrived at my office at 11:30 because the transportation provider is on time, but then had to sit from 11:30 to 1 because their appointment was set for 1. They didn't trust that the system was going to get there on time. They set it early so they would show up on time.
And that's just a small snippet of a lot of our consumers and what we receive on a daily basis. We're pretty darn flexible. We're very creative in finding other ways to get these things achieved. If we can't get it done through the actual mode of transit that we're looking at trying to get it done through. For instance, one that brings to mind right now is that I had an individual that lived in Leroy, Illinois, and needed to get out of Leroy and to get back into Bloomington for prescription drugs. Needed them. Prescription drugs was completely out. Could there have been better planning? Yes, there could have been better planning. But prescription drugs ran out. They're life-saving drugs. Our on-call service wasn't going to be able to do that, and that turnaround, it wasn't going to happen. There wasn't any options for this individual to use Uber or Lyft because there wasn't any accessible vehicles. Luckily, there was a faith-based system set in place. They were able to run that consumer from Leroy, Illinois, into the pharmacist to be able to get that achieved, and then get back to and get that medication for that individual back to so it could be dispensed. That's the type of creativity that Centers for Independent Living and persons with disabilities go through every day. Is that we have to be very quick and nimble and think about how am I going to get this achieved? How else can I be inclusive in the community when I know that the active barriers that are being built are against me on most aspects, but not in like everybody's purposely doing these things. It's just now we're trying to get a lens to view things and saying, can we do them differently? Or instead of looking at things of, this is the way that the very dangerous language that I always speak of is, this is the way that we've always done it. This is the way that we've always built it. So we're just going to continue down that path. Now, when I hear those, immediately, just like I'm saying it out loud, the hairs on my back, because I've got a lot of them now because I turned 45 yesterday. They're standing up. They're letting me know that something's just not right. And I'm looking at all of our providers, and I'm working right alongside you, is that we can get creative. We can figure things out. If you're a driver, thinking outside the box, how can I better serve this individual? If they're standing there and you know that there might be some concerns or they're rolling there, as that, can I bump my bus a few feet forward? Policy says I can't do that, right? But can we actively think about ways to creatively get that onboarding, and lighting area? I forget my terminology now I'm all backwards. But thinking of different ways on how we can achieve and creating greater access for our persons with disabilities. If you're looking at our numbers in the country, specifically where I'm at, where we serve, we're right about 20% of our population. And I know that most of our service providers are doing their damnedest to try to make sure that persons with disabilities are getting the services that they need. And that's why I always go back to Show Bus and Laura Dick, is even though it's not a money problem this year, it's a driver problem. And they're having significant concerns with getting their drivers and being able to run the routes, be able to get the services they need. But by gosh, if something were to come in and it revolves around a person with a disability, Laura Dick's the first one on the call. She's going to take it and say, what is it that you need? I'm going to try to make this work the best that I can. If I got to reroute, we're going to do that. If we've got to move off a different route and we're going to bring another one in, we're going to do that. Do we need a smaller vehicle? There might be some weight discrepancies when we're serving some of the rural areas where we don't have built up infrastructure and we're on dirt and we're on gravel. I'm going to take a different bus out there. And so it's just having that constant communication with the SILs and thinking of just different creative ways to get that service done.
I'm gonna test something real quick. Raise your hand if you know your local Center for Independent Living and can name it. Okay. Out of all of the people who have their hands up, keep your hand raised if you have a relationship with your local Center for Independent Living and call them if you need something. The people that don't have their hands up, get to know your local Center for Independent Living. We can do driver training. I do driver training for all of our transportation providers all the time. Go in and do driver training, help them with disability awareness. And that started very simply, right? And now it's turned into driver training and fixed route training and a contact person they can call if something happens and they want to talk it through. Get to know those folks. If you don't know who they are, come talk to us. Tell us what county you're in. We'll tell you who your Center for Independent Living is and we'll get you a contact. Shelley can probably get you all of that stuff fairly quickly.
Well, that brings me to a point. I have a document. I have two documents. RTAC had did a survey back at the end of 2019, asking all of the Centers for Independent Living what their issues were with transportation. And every center that responded, there's a summary document of all of the things that they had to say. Also, I have another document that Ed helped put together that are specific examples of problems that people are having with the non-emergency medical transportation. He not only has remarks from the Centers for Independent Living, but he also has remarks from people from the Department of Aging. And I know AARP has these same concerns. So what I want to send to Dave tomorrow so that he can get it out to all of you that are registered for this conference, I will send those two documents. I will send you the letter from INSIL. Also, I will send you a brochure or a print version of the brochure of the map of Illinois and what center covers each county. And I'll give you contact information for that specific Center for Independent Living. So you will get a whole listing of locations and phone numbers and emails so that you can reach out. And I would encourage you to do that. Please know, we're not here to browbeat you. We're just here to tell you the problems that we see. When you leave here today, I want you to think about, before you go eat and drink, I want you to think about while you're not drinking, what it would be like, what it would be like if you didn't have your car, what it would be like if you couldn't drive. You know, my mother, we had to take her license away from her a few years ago. Was just turned 91, but her driving got so atrocious that, you know, me and my brother just said, no more, Mom, no more. You're not going to do this. But she's been without her car, and she says to me, Hon, I don't know how you have done it all of these years, not being able to drive. It's a thought that many, many, many of us have. How do we get around on a day-to-day basis? And I know you guys want to provide the answers. So let's put our heads together, come up with some creative things that can help you and help all of the people that you serve. Do you guys have any closing remarks?
No, I think you pretty much nailed that, Shelley, and took all the thunder. I think one of the last things is, and I think it's going to go back to that relying piece, is that how many people do you rely on in a given day? It's probably going to be pretty low. So then you think about how many systems do you rely on in a given day that are going to be able to achieve what you need to get done in a day? It's probably going to be pretty low again. So it ultimately comes back to you got to rely on yourself. And persons with disabilities, boy, we're resilient. We can figure out some creative ways to be able to achieve things that most wouldn't even think outside the box. So I know that there's a lot of creative individuals in here, and I appreciate every one of you to at least listen to us today. Again, as an advocate, I'm bringing the concerns in here. I wrote them all down. These are things that are coming from our community. They're coming from the people that we serve. And I just want to make sure that if you're not aware of what SILs are in your area, I know that Shelley just said that she's going to be able to get that information out, but the Illinois Network for Centers for Independent Living, that would be just the tip of the spear for you. And then you can just pour down from there. It's really easy from there.
Well, and I think, you know, obviously, thank you all for letting us come and talk about this. I would love to see when we come back next year to this conference, that when we ask you what your relationships are with Centers for Independent Living, everyone in this room has a relationship with their center and has addressed some of the barriers that are going on in their community. 22 centers in Illinois, covering all counties in Illinois. It would be great to come back next year and hear you all talk about how we've eliminated some barriers in the last year working directly with the disability community.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
That was great. And also the SILs are pretty much heavily involved with the HSTP program and do go to meetings. I know that. I've seen that firsthand. There is some coordination that occurs there, which is really good. And occasionally we get a call at RTAC and we work with the coordinators and with providers in the regions where someone needs a ride. And we have been successful. Angel Marinich, are you here in the room right now? Rural Peoria just solved what I didn't think was going to be a solvable problem, getting someone to work at the far edge of the service area at a weird time of day when they needed one ride, and they figured out how to do that with a bus that was in that general area every day. There are no home runs left in this field anymore. Everything you do, every improvement is incremental. And like Eric said, it just, one little thing every now and then just makes lives easier for people who need it the most. It's really important. It seems like a big problem, and it is, but you can chop off little parts of it simply. All right, it is 2:30. We're scheduled for a break. When we come back, and we'll start at 3 o'clock firm, Karen Vineyard, the CFO of Rides, and Adam Latch, the CEO of Rides, will be here to help you with non-emergency medical transportation and how to use Medicaid. And this is an issue that these folks just described to us, that if more transit providers used Medicaid funding and participated, more people would get the rides that they need. So I really encourage you to come back for that. And if you're on Zoom, if you're still having some audio trouble, please write another comment there. And Mabel's watching. Karen and Adam, I'm sure will be right on the mics for you. So thanks again. We'll see you in half an hour. And I'll bring everybody into their seats. And I like to pass on information because what I do in my life is I eat tacos and I know things. If there's anybody here that loves oranges, there's an orange called a Sumo orange. Has anybody heard of those? Beautiful, big, huge. This Walmart that's up the street has bags, 2-pound bags of them for $1.50. There's 4 or 5 of them in the bag. I bought some in Iowa last week and they were almost $2 a piece. And they're good. I bought 5 bags. So anybody wants Sumo oranges, believe it or not, this Walmart's got them. Sorry for everybody on Zoom, unless I haven't seen them anywhere else. But they're awesome, the best. 30 years it takes to get the tree to produce an orange. So, all right, I am about ready. We have, let me also look at the camera and say hi, Ed Heflin, if you're watching, and all the good folks at home. Miranda and Pete say hi, and it's funny that, you know, we're so close to home and yet so far. I don't know. Okay, I have Karen Vineyard, Adam Latch. Karen's going to do most of the work here. She's going to talk about Medicaid, and we really do appreciate her being here. She has, whether she likes to accept it or not, become one of the experts in the field in the entire state, and has been a go-to for all of us, and we ask her a lot of questions outside of the conference too, and she's been a big help. So thank you very much. We'll have only a few comments at the end of this.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for staying for this session. And, you know, Emily thought hers might be a very dry session with the transit asset management, but you know, who knows? This may win the award for being the driest one, okay? My name is Karen Vineyard from Rides Mass Transit, and this is Adam Latch, also from Rides Mass Transit. And we are going to start out this afternoon with just a very quick quiz. And I will tell you, I have a very elaborate Sonic gift card here for the winner who can tell me, okay, have you ever heard of the farmers commercial? We are farmers, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 okay? Can anybody tell me the tagline that goes along with that commercial? You gotta yell me out louder. So, there is an elaborate gift waiting for someone to say this. Come on, be proud. What is it? Okay, basically, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, okay? Adam, would you run that out there to him, please? Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, that's gonna be the tagline for this presentation. We know a thing or two. Now remember, it doesn't say we know everything. It just said we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, and that's about Medicaid transportation. So back when I started at Rides in 2002, I heard all the folklore about what was being done to raise local match. We're located in Southern Illinois, and we're very rural. And when Rides began, raising the necessary local match was a difficult thing for us. And so I heard all the stories that we would have community chicken and dumpling dinners and craft sales in order to raise our local match. Well, I'll tell you, we're no longer having the chicken and dumpling dinners. And macrame and crochet is no longer a required job skill because actually a large part of that is because of Medicaid transportation. And so today we'd like to talk about how important Medicaid and MCO transportation is. It's very important. It is a great form of local match. The more match you raise, obviously then, the more dope funding possibly that you can pull off, and then also the more service that you can provide. That Medicaid and MCO transportation, it's a great way to establish existing routes. You know, one obvious example is if you have a dialysis patient who goes to dialysis 3 times a week to the same facility, to the same city, then by being able to provide that Medicaid or MCO service, then that's establishing a route there into that city or that surrounding area. Another thing that Medicaid and MCO transportation does is it provides a community resource. If you think about what your company's mission statement is, our mission statement is to provide safe, affordable, accessible transportation to our community. And that's also what Medicaid and MCO transportation does. You know, in just this last session that we were in, they talked about how it was needed in our areas for the MCOs. They specifically said MCOs, that there were problems in those areas. And so just to kind of heighten the information that we really do need this and need to provide it. Now, we'll talk about it here later. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But it is a necessary thing, just as they spoke of. Where we are, we're in several counties. And one of the things that's difficult when you first start to work for us is because we'll talk about a county, we'll say it's Crawford County. Well, we may refer to that within our office, we'll call it Crawford County, but then there's cities within that county, we'll call it Robinson, Illinois, so it's Robinson. So when we're talking in the office with someone that's new, we'll call it Crawford County. Oh, we're going to Crawford. Oh, we're going to Robinson. Oh, we're going to Paris. Oh, we're going to Edgar. You know, we say all these names and we think everybody knows what they are, But sometimes going by various names, it's difficult to know if, okay, are we talking about the same thing here? And that's kind of how it is with Medicaid, because Medicaid can go by various names as well. It may be called Medicaid. It may be called public aid. It may be called straight Medicaid, regular Medicaid, traditional Medicaid. So there's lots of different names that it can go by, but it's really still all the same thing. Prior to 2018, there was only Medicaid. But in 2018, the state of Illinois introduced the MCOs, the managed care organizations. And for the client then, they went from a traditional Medicaid then to a MCO for their insurance coverage. And so within that MCO, that person then might be covered by Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Humana, Meridian, Molina. So for the client, that's kind of how it changed. For us as the transportation providers, then we have two, MTM or Motive Care, which used to be called Logisticare. And so then those two MCOs then funnel those medical trips then to the various insurance companies for the clients. And one last thing too, there's another name out there, Medicare. Sometimes that's confused with Medicaid. Now, Medicare is really for someone who's 65 years of age or older or disabled. And Medicare does not pay for non-emergency transportation. Now, the exception to that would be is that if you're Medicare primary and Medicaid secondary, then you can use your Medicaid secondary then to cover transportation. So sometimes that's a little confusing because those words are so similar, Medicare and Medicaid, but Medicare does not pay for non-emergency transportation. Medicaid is not constricted by age. It's available to anyone who falls within certain income guidelines and or is also disabled. So let's kind of break those down a little bit. We're going to start with Medicaid first. If you are enrolled, if you're not enrolled in Medicaid yet, then the first thing that you would have to do is you would have to get enrolled through the impact system. And in your packet, there is a handout kind of on this lilac colored paper of just some various information. I just tried to think about things, and I called it a beginner's guide of anything that you might need to know if you have no idea about any of this. And this is called 101. So I apologize if it's, way below what you already know in advance. But the impact system information is there to be able to become enrolled in that system. When you go to that website, though, the problem with that is that's a very dated website. Back in 2015, 2017, the state of Illinois introduced impact, and a lot of the information on that website still relates to that revalidation process. So be careful when you look at the FAQs, because a lot of those are referring to the time back in 15, 16, and 17 when we were going through that revalidation process. A couple of the things to think about when you're going to apply to impact for the first time is it will tell you right there on the front page, it'll say these are the things that you need. You'll need an NPI number. Well, an NPI is a national provider ID. We in transportation do not need one of those. Now, if you're a doctor providing service, yes, you have to have an NPI in order to do that. But in transportation, we do not have to. So just keep telling everybody, I'm in transportation, I don't need an NPI. The other thing, good, just helpful hints is like your provider type is an 071. Those are things that you just might not know off the top of your head. And then the taxonomy codes are on the purple sheet as well, if it's a walk-on versus a wheelchair. So those are just things, just little helpful hints. I am not sure how long that process takes any longer. And I'm presuming, though, you're going to have to provide them with a lot of information just to get set up initially. You're probably going to have to provide them with all of your vehicles, your VIN numbers, your makes and models, your drivers, their driver's license. I know that even when we did the revalidation process, we're governed by a board of directors. So we had to even give all of our board of directors driver's license. Our drivers had to be fingerprinted during that process. So it could be a lengthy process. What I'd like to compare that to though is, have you ever done a remodeling job at home? Okay, it's a lot of work up front. Have you ever tried to lose weight? Okay, it's a lot of work, but hopefully the results that you get from the effort that you put into it is worth the no pain, no gain, okay? So hopefully that will be worth it. Once you're enrolled in Impact and Public Aid, they will send you a provider information sheet. It'll be a horizontal sheet of paper. It will tell you what you're approved for. If you're approved for walk-ons, AO 120, wheelchairs, AO 130, mileage, escorts, and it will also have the dollar amounts beside that as well. I have one of those as an example. If you ever need to see that, I'd be happy to show it to you afterwards. You will also need to keep that sheet. They send those out annually, but make sure you keep that in a place that you have, because then once you go into the MCOs also require that provider information sheet. So like I said, just once you get that, keep that in a place where you know it is. So let's talk about how does it work? How does a person who is on traditional, straight, regular Medicaid, how does that work? They call in and they need a ride to the doctor. Well, we ask them for their public aid number or their RIN number, their recipient ID number. It's always a 9-digit number. Well, while we're talking to them on the phone, we will go ahead and have Medi, again, from your purple sheet, pulled up. It's a website out of HFS. So it will show us what they are eligible for. And you can check their eligibility. It doesn't matter if they're an MCO or they're straight Medicaid. So once they give us that public aid number, then we'll look at that. When you look at that screen across the top, it will either say Medicaid eligible, or if you scroll all the way down, it will tell you that they're enrolled in MCO. So that is very important because many of the people that we're even dealing with, they don't even know the difference between, oh, I'm an MCO or I'm out of Aetna or et cetera. So it's our duty to know where they need to go and what information we need from them. You ask the client also for a prior approval number that they've received from First Transit. If they have that, then you're ready to book that trip. One thing that we did, if you guys have CTS, in the master column, there's in that drop-down box of the master, there's called a purpose. I think it's just purpose master is what it's called. We went ahead and took all of the diagnosis codes out of Passport and we entered those under the purpose codes in CTS. And what that did for us is that while we're having that client on the phone and we're talking with them, then we're able to just kind of casually say, okay, I see that you're going to Dr. Jones. Can you tell me what the nature of your visit is? And sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they won't. If they go ahead and say, oh, I'm just having x-rays today, blah, 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 then you could go and in that purpose code, you can go ahead and click on that. And that way, that's very helpful that if that trip gets denied and you have to go back into Passport and rebook that trip, when you rebook that trip, it asks for those diagnosis codes. And if you have already put those same diagnosis codes into CTS, then you've exactly got the exact match that you need then to go ahead and book that trip. So that's just something helpful that we have found. If a client does not have a prior approval, then you'll have to ask them to go ahead and get that prior approval. Another thing that what we've done is we go ahead and transfer them to, if it's First Transit, then we'll go ahead and transfer them to First Transit. If not, if it's one of the MCOs at the bottom of that purple page, all the phone numbers for those various insurances are there. And so while we have that client on the phone, we'll say, okay, I'm sorry, you'll need to go ahead and get your prior approval first. Let me go ahead and transfer you right now. Obviously, the best thing to do is while that person is in the mood to make their appointment, then if you can go ahead and just transfer them over and they can get that prior approval, it's much more helpful than if you'll say, okay, you need to hang up, you need to call your insurance company, et cetera. So that's another thing that we have found helpful. I mentioned Passport, and that's within First Transit. that allows you to view pending, approved, and denied prior approvals. That's issued to Medicaid clients. Now, it does not apply to MCOs. Passport is only for Medicaid clients. And you can also request a trip or a prior approval on behalf of a client through Passport, again, for a Medicaid. You can't do that for all of your clients, but if you have someone that you just know that is maybe easily confused, maybe hard of hearing, whatever, you may be able to then go ahead and just request that through Passport on behalf of that client. And then, as I said earlier, sometimes you have to rebook a trip if it got denied, and that's what you would also use the Passport system for. So let's touch on billing Medicaid just real quick. I'm not sure about your other softwares, but once again, as I said, we use CTS, and we are able to upload and bill Medicaid just honestly within a few minutes. And we do it once a month. We just go ahead and have our validators finish up, and then we'll just do it one time a month to upload that Medicaid to the clearinghouse. If your software does not allow you to go ahead and just automatically electronically upload that file, then you can use the Medi system through that HFS website. But the problem with that is, or the disadvantage of that is, you're having to type in or retype in much of the same information that you already have in your dispatch software, because you're having to type in the person's name, their ID number, where you're picking them up, where you're taking them to, etc. So again, it can be done, and it's very easy. We use the Medi system to, when we have a denied claim, if we have to go back in and send it in again, then we'll use that because there's a limitation on what CTS can do in that area. We talked about earlier, the first thing, we talked about how Medicaid was a good form of local match. So how much does it pay? A walk-on, which is, as I said, a code AO120, it pays for $7.06 a leg for a trip. Wheelchairs, an AO130, it pays a base rate of $12.12. And that's for each leg. All mileage, AO425, is paid at 80 cents a loaded mile. So it's not, there's no deadhead. It's just when they're on the bus. And then you can also bill for one escort, and that's a T2001, and that's paid at $2.79. So you're talking taking under traditional Medicaid, you're talking about taking someone to a doctor's office. If you have no mileage, then it's basically a $14 trip or a $24 trip, depending upon if they're a walk-on or if they are a wheelchair. And so, as we'll talk about later too, I mean, that will add up. And if that's a dialysis that you're taking, then that's 3 times a week that you're taking that individual. I've made out on each of these as we go through them, I've made out a top 5 list of positive things about each of these on traditional Medicaid. But with keeping with Christina's speaking this morning about how we're supposed to be grateful for various things, I would like for, if someone, and again, there's a wonderful prize for this as well, okay? That I want one person to tell me one thing that they are grateful for that traditional public aid does for them, or what they enjoy about traditional public aid. Ready, set, go. It's a wonderful prize. Does anybody bill traditional public aid? Ah, there you go. Yes. Can you tell me something good about it?
Here at 11:15, I can pick you up about 10:45.
Thank you very much. Give that girl a prize, Vanna. Anna. Yeah, any of them, okay? Yes, she just mentioned that it helps the public and for people who may not even be able to afford that ride. I'll tell you my top 5 positive things about traditional Medicaid is that if someone calls at the last minute and needs to go to the doctor, we can take the client and hopefully get paid. I mean, and most of the time get paid. My point is traditional Medicaid will allow you to get a post-approval. So you can go ahead and take the trip and you have 20 days, not business days, but 20 days to then go to First Transit and get a post-approval. So that is kind of a big deal because sometimes there are things that come up at the last minute. So that's on my top 5 list. MCOs don't allow that. Okay, so that's why it's a top 5 in traditional Medicaid. The reps that you deal with for traditional Medicaid, they're familiar with the Illinois geography. Okay, you'll find out why that's important later. But yes, they're familiar with Illinois. It's an Illinois-based program, so they are, at least they kind of know their state. As I mentioned earlier, we as the provider can request prior approvals for the clients who may have difficulties, and that would be through the passport system. So that's a big plus too, providing customer service. So we can do that for our clients if they need that. There's a term standing approvals or blanket approvals. If someone is a dialysis or therapy, they can get an approval for a longer length of time. So like dialysis is usually are like for a 6-month period. So you only have one approval for that 6-month period. And so that's a very nice thing as well. You're not having to input a new prior approval number every time that you're taking them to dialysis. And also the trip status is also on Medi. It's available on Medi. And so you can also look up to see if claims have been rejected, and you can rebill those up to 6 months from the date of service. I will say just the other day when we were doing some reviews, we noticed that a whole month had not been paid. And so then when we got looking, we went into Medi and it was like the system, they had not even received that bill. That doesn't happen often. It's a fluke, but it happened. And so then we were able to literally that day, we needed to go ahead and upload that whole batch again. And in about 2 or 3 days, we went back into Medi and boom, and they were showing that they were going to be paid. So that was a very positive thing as well. So those are my top 5 positive things for traditional Medicaid. Is it a perfect system? Well, no, it's not. So I'm going to give you some of my glass half full things about traditional Medicaid. Sometimes the approvals can be denied after you've taken the trip. First Transit, who is they are a third-party, subcontractor of HFS. And so they're the ones that issue the approvals. And so they will do random spot checks to see if they actually went to that facility. You know, because I don't know about you guys, but we've had people that would get on our bus and tell us that they have an approval at Dr. Jones and they really just wanted to go to Walmart or wherever they wanted to go. So that happens. And so First Transit will do random spot checks. What we will do, and that's unfortunate because you've already taken the trip and then now you're getting this denial afterwards. One of the things that we will do, once I see that that denial states that it's a failed validation check, then what I will do is many times I'll see who they went to. They went to Dr. Jones. So I will call Dr. Jones' office and I'll just say, hi, I'm Karen Vineyard from Wrights Mass Transit District, and we transported your patient or client, Adam Latch, to your office on, January the 31st. And in order for us to get paid, we have to have a prior approval. And I just need to verify that you did see him on that day. And they'll say, oh, let me look that up. Yes, we did. I said, well, thank you. And your name again was? Okay, thanks so much. Okay. And then what I'll do is I make sure I write down her name. And then I also, his or her name. And then I also will write, if that was a direct line, I'll write that down. Or if I had to I had to call the number and then I had to go to option 1, option 2, and option 4. Then when I rebook that trip through Passport, right when you get ready to hit submit, there's a little notes column box right there. I'll say claim was originally denied because of failed validation. I spoke to Stacy at Dr. Jones' office at 618-273-2549 at option 1, 2, and then 4, and she confirmed that the client was there. That way, First Transit, okay, and again, you can be cynical sometimes, and that you know that if they have to go punch 1 and then 2 and then 4, they are, and I was told they only stay on the line for 60 seconds to validate that a trip was really there. So if they have to punch a whole bunch of numbers, they're not going to. So I try to provide them with as much information as we can. And so that's just one of those things that we've learned that, okay, if we can do it that way, then the trip can be approved, and then you just have to change your prior approval number, and then life should be good. One other half full glass kind of thing on traditional Medicaid, you do have to be careful on mileage. You cannot have 2 Medicaid clients on the bus at the same time and both bill mileage. Okay, and if you get your Illinois Department of Transportation Chapter 200 handbook out for Medicaid, it gives you some examples in there. Again, I've got that with me if anybody wants to look at them. They're very specific. But what happens is if you pick, we'll say Mary up at 8 o'clock and she's going 10 miles. Then you pick Bill up at 8:03 and he's going 30 miles. You can only bill Mary's mileage because she was the first one on the bus. You can only bill mileage. You can bill base rate for both, but mileage can only be for Mary for those 10 miles. Even though Bill went 20 miles further, you can't bill that because they were on the bus at the same time together. So my point is that sometimes there's some strategy involved in this as well. If you are able to, make sure you pick up Bill first because he's going 30 miles and you can bill for that 30 miles. Then go pick up Mary because you're going to be dropping her off first. So it's just something to know that sometimes those mileage things can get you. MCOs, they don't care about that, but traditional Medicaid does. Another, not so fun thing about the traditional is a PCS form, a physician certification statement. And Medicaid requires this. And what it does is if a trip starts at a hospital or a long-term care facility, then you have to have this physician certification statement. And basically what it's doing, Medicaid just wants to make sure that the person is receiving the proper level of service. As I told you, they pay $12.12 for a wheelchair. They only pay $7 for a walk-on. So they're wanting to make sure that a person who really should be a walk-on, you're billing for that and not the higher rate. And that's kind of what this PCS form does. But once again, what we've done is when maybe it's the social worker from the hospital or maybe it's the individual from the long-term care facility, when they call wanting to book a ride, as we have them on the phone, we'll say, and do you have that PCS form? And most of the time they'll say, a what? And we'll say, no worries. How about if we just fax one over to you and you can fill it out and then fax it back to us? And then what we will do is we'll go ahead and fill out the name, where they're picking them up from, where they're going to, because we just got that information from them. We'll fax that over to them. All they have to do is go, okay, it needs to be a wheelchair and it's because of this, and they sign their name. They'll send it back to us. Then we have control of that. We can send that on to First Transit. I will tell you, sometimes First Transit will lose faxes. And so many times we try to be that middleman in order to okay, we have it in our possession. We can fax it to them 20 times, but the hospital would not want to do it that way. We have a motto at Rides that says, who needs it most? And so it's like, if you need it most to have that information filled out in order to get paid, then it's worth a little more effort on our part to go ahead and fill out the name, to fill out the address, make it as easy on the hospital or the long-term care facilities as possible, because you're going to continue to work with them. And so you don't want that to be in an adversary type of role. So those are just a few things that we've done. Historically, payments have always been a problem with traditional Medicaid. But I will say lately, I was even surprised at this. I just checked the other day for this, and we actually billed Medicaid on January the 5th, and we actually had our money in the bank on January the 22nd. So that was about a 2-week turnaround. So I don't know if they have gotten better now because the MCOs are on a pretty well a 2-week turnaround. But I was kind of genuinely surprised that it was. We get payments sporadically, and I just hadn't noticed that it had been that kind of positive. We'll also say we do use the comptroller's website. Again, that's on the purple sheet. I don't know if you guys use that or not. But if you'll go into the comptroller's website, you can sign up for an email alert. And that way, every time I have something deposited into my account from the state of Illinois through traditional Medicaid, then I get an email alert that it's there. That also works for your IDOT payments too, if you aren't signed up for that. So that's everything that I want to talk about for the traditional Medicaid. Then I'm going to move into the MCOs. Does anybody have anything specific, a question on the traditional Medicaid that they wanted to ask? You may need to stand up. I don't know. Yeah, so I can hear and everyone else can hear, or maybe, yeah. Diagnosis?
It's bringing, but it's the same number I just hung up from.
It's over on the top right. I think it says trips, and it's the very last one, request a trip. Oh, that was an easy one, thanks. Oh, okay. Well, it's right here, okay? Anybody else have a question on traditional Medicaid before we get into the MCOs? Okay, great. Let's go into MCOs then. The managed care organizations. As I mentioned earlier, there are two. There's MTM and Motive Care. And then the various insurance companies that are under those umbrellas. In order to enroll in either Motive Care or MTM, you do have to first be enrolled in Impact or Public Aid. And so the contact information is on that purple sheet. I reached out to both of our contacts. Motive Care, Daniel is our contact guy. He said, hey, just have them email me and I'll get them started, etc. Stacy is our contact for MTM. She said, oh, here is the link. Just have them go there and start the application. So those are your two contact people. If you guys aren't enrolled, that's the starting places for that. When a person, again, if they're Motive Care, we'll start with Motive Care first. If they're Motive Care and they call in for a ride, it's different than traditional public aid. Let me just say that. Once again, though, we will look up their eligibility on the Medi system, and we will ask them if they've talked to their insurance company yet. Say it's Blue Cross Blue Shield. If not, as I said earlier, we will transfer them over to Blue Cross so that they can get their prior approval. The client then will give Motive Care their trip information. And then if Motive Care assigns that trip to us, then we will see it in our portal. Now, once again, we have CTS and Motive Care, they sync together. So it comes directly into our holding pin in CTS. When the client is on the phone, Motive Care does go ahead and give the client a time of pickup. And then what happens when we see that trip in our holding pin, then if we can perform that trip within 15 minutes, then we go ahead and just, that's it. Everything's great. If we can't perform that within 15 minutes, then we find a time that is acceptable. We call the client back. We let them know of the change. Then we call Motive Care back, let them know of the change because they have to change that in our system. And then actually Motive Care then calls the client back to make sure that we had called them, even though we already had. So that's a little bit different. Motive Care is the one assigning the time to them. If the client calls in and needs to cancel a trip, we have to once again transfer them over to Motive Care. We can't do that. And then Motive Care cancels that in our system. That's kind of how it works for the MCOs. Just as I did in, let me stop here and ask, how many people are using motive care? How many people are using motive care? Okay, okay. Can any of those few people in the room, okay, once again, an attitude of gratitude today, all right? Can anybody tell me something that they are grateful for motive care? There is, again, a luxurious prize awaiting for Adam to hand to you. So anybody have something positive they can say about motive care? Okay, say it louder. Okay.
Doesn't count, she's too far away.
Thank you. Okay, and it does sync with CTS, and that is a very, very helpful. I'll tell you about my top 5 for motive care. They do have a user-friendly portal. You can easily print from it, reroute, cancel trips, because it comes through automatically. They do have a call center that's available for corrections. If you have to make address changes or time changes. For the MCOs, the standing approvals or those blanket approvals, they are all handled by motive care. They do all that work. So we don't have to collect any of that paperwork. As I told you, when we're doing traditional Medicaid, many times we are that middleman because we want them to fax that information to us so that we can fax it on to First Transit, because as I said, sometimes First Transit, you have to continually fax them information. So many times we're in the middle trying to always help. So with the MCOs, they take care of those blanket approvals all themselves. So that's a positive. On motive care, I think the payment remittance, my person said, is fantastic, okay? That's because she's comparing it to MTM. But she said it's a very detailed report. It clearly states that the ride is approved or denied. It's in an organized way. You can download it and it's accessible all the time. And again, that's going to be the drawback when you hear MTM, not so much on those. My other top 5 for motive care, the rates of pay. The rates of pay are even more than traditional Medicaid. And there's no mileage penalty on your MCOs. So for a person on a walk-on person, and they kind of have a tier going from like 0 to 3 miles, I'm going to give you some roundabout, it's about $15.50 for that base rate and the mileage, okay, compared to $7.06. And then it goes up like from 4 to 7 miles, it may be like, I don't know, $16. And then from 5 to, I don't know, 8 miles or something like that, it goes up to $17. And then after you get over 10 miles, it's your base rate plus $1.50 a mile. And 80 cents is what traditional Medicaid pays. And then a wheelchair actually starts at about $21.87 in that first tier. And then it goes on up and goes on up. And then they also pay the $1.50 after your first 10 miles. So a substantial amount of difference even then in the MCOs than the traditional Medicaid. Once again, is it a perfect system? No, it's not either. My glass half full on the motive care would be that you cannot obtain post approvals. So once you, if you didn't have an approval going into it, you're not going to get one. You've just done the trip, and you're not going to be reimbursed for that. I will tell you, sometimes that's a problem. What will happen is, it's just like regular open enrollment on insurance, that a person may have been on traditional public aid, and then maybe the state of Illinois moved them off to motive care. And so they have 30 days to decide if they want to stay with that insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield, under motive care. If they do not want to stay with it, then they have that 30 days, just kind of like we do in open enrollment. This is their insurance. They have 30 days to decide whether they want to or not. And then they can make that decision. No, I don't want to. I'm going to go back to traditional Medicaid. Well, then they are locked into that for 1 year. But during that 30 days that, public aid Medicaid has moved them off into this MCO, that's why using the Medi system is so important to check their eligibility. Because I will say, we have had times where we will get a prior approval through First Transit showing that they are Medicaid eligible, and then we will also get a prior approval for one of the MCOs. And so then you kind of ask yourself, okay, who's really paying for this trip? And that's why it's so important to always be checking that Medi. So what my point is, you may continue billing them under traditional Medicaid, and they've changed to an MCO. And until you start getting those rejections from the traditional Medicaid, then you are not able to go back and get a post-approval on this. So you may have lost out with a week or 2 weeks or a month. And if they're going to dialysis, that's a lot of change. So just be aware that in the MCOs, they do not have post-approvals. The other thing that it's not a perfect system is that it's a nationwide company, and their representatives are from all over the country, and they are not as familiar with Illinois geography as just our straight traditional Medicaid. I will say, because we will get trips and, hey, can you take a trip in Peoria? No, that's outside of our service area, okay, by, 5 hours. So they are not aware of that. So sometimes that can be a little bit. And then sometimes even with that, many times you may take a longer trip than necessary to, say, a routine care, just because they are unaware that, oh, wow, they could have gone to this facility, which was, just down the street, instead of going 10 miles to this facility. So just not being aware of the geography sometimes is a little bit of an issue also. Another little glass half full thing is last minute trips are automatically assigned to us from Motive Care. I say from their overnight crew. So like when our people are almost getting ready to leave for the day, and Motive Care has a group that comes in at 4 or 5 o'clock, and then when our dispatcher comes in the morning first thing, she'll look in CTS, and there may be a whole bunch of trips there from Motive Care overnight that they're wanting us to take on that day. Once again, it's a scramble. If we can seat them like they've told us within that first 15 minutes, then we'll go ahead and hurry and book that trip. If we can't meet that need within that 15 minutes, then we will go ahead and try to find something within that day and book that trip and change that time. We'll call the client, tell them, okay, we can't get you at 9 o'clock, but we can get you at 10:15. Then we go ahead and call Motive Care back, tell them of the change. And I will say by that point, because it's a last minute trip, they're going, oh yeah, no problem, okay? Just because they want the trip to be taken. But that is an issue, I will say, just those last minute trips coming in. Dave? Yeah. Yes. And many times that's a good point too, Dave, because sometimes that's what we will even do ourselves, is that if we're not able to take them at 9 o'clock, we might even call the facility and say, hey, can you see them at 10 instead, or something like that. Yeah, you're right. But that can be a little tricky, just those coming in automatically. And if you aren't able to take the trip, you can't, but because those are those last minute trips. The other thing that's a little bit of a disadvantage on Motive Care is that they have a will call return ride. As I said, when the client is on the phone placing their booking their trip with Motive Care, they go ahead and assign them a trip pickup time, but they tell them, when you're finished with your appointment, just call the provider, a will call return ride. And what that happens, though, again, what we do to avoid that, because Motive Care puts it in as a 00:00. That's very difficult to schedule. And so what we will do is we'll do our best guess. And if we know that they're going for a certain procedure or a certain, if it's just a doctor's appointment, we'll go ahead and we put in a return trip into our system. Because, I mean, we feel like we have to be able to know when we're going to probably be out there to pick them up. I'll say sometimes we, win at that, and then sometimes we may be way off on that guess. They may get held up for some reason. So then that requires us then to, okay, this driver, hey, Mrs. Jones isn't there. Okay, yeah, okay, we'll send another bus later on to pick her up. So that is a drawback. They do have return call. They want the client to call you for the return trip. I'm going to move on to MTM because they're very similar. And then after I get done with MTM, we'll take any kind of MCO questions that you might have. MTM is very similar, as I said, but we do have to enter that trip manually into our software. It does not sync with our software, like I said, Motive Care did. So we do enter that manually. MTM will send the trip through their link, their MTM link from their portal. We do not get notification of that. So we just have to look in their portal multiple times a day to see if any new trips have popped up. MTM does not assign times to the client. So we do, once we see that in the portal, then we will go ahead and find the appropriate time that we can access that trip. And then we'll call that client back and we'll say, hey, we'll be able to pick you up at 9:15 to take you to see Dr. Jones. So those are a couple of the differences between MTM versus Motive Care. Again, very similar on everything else. Once again, is there anybody that can say something nice or a level of gratitude about MTM? This one's a little harder. Okay, I'll talk about that why later. Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that could say something of gratitude that they appreciate about MTM for a lovely prize? Turn it upside down. Anybody? Anybody? Yes, yes, yes. What was the last part? Okay, okay. There you go. All right, that would be a positive thing. Yes, it would be. I did a top 5 on everybody. Now, I could only come up with 4 on MTM, okay, just to be full disclosure, all right? And some of them repeat from Motive Care. The standing orders, MTM handles completely. And so we don't have to collect any of the paperwork. The rates of pay, same thing. The rates of pay are very similar to what I gave you from Motive Care. And they typically, I will say, they pay every 2 weeks because I log our payments. And if we have a payment from MTM on February 2nd, 2/2, by golly, on 2/16, that other payment is in my bank. So that is a positive thing. They are on an every 2 week payment cycle. If a trip is denied, then it is very easy to resubmit that trip. And I was struggling to even find 4. And my 4th one was that our area where we are is very highly saturated with MTM clients. And so there is a need out there. And so that is a very positive thing. I'm not sure where it is, how it is in everybody's area. I think different parts of the state, they tried to divide up Motive Care versus MTM. But like I said, where we are, MTM is, we're highly saturated with MTM. If I move on to the glass half full items for MTM, once again, you can't obtain a post approval. And as I stated earlier, why the difficulties with that, sometimes you can get hung on that if they were traditional and they switched over. If there's problems with a trip, we can't call MTM. The client must call MTM. We can't assist the client with the trip. And so sometimes our clients get frustrated with the process, and they don't even want to bother with going through getting the MCO. They say they just want to pay cash for the trip. The problem with that, and again, I will say we struggle with that, is that it erodes your ability then to raise that local match. You're trading a potential $30 trip or more for, say, a $2 trip. And that $2 trip is a fare. It's not local match. So it is very important to try to do as much as you can to assist that client. As I said, you know, sometimes we'll even say, if they even start to say, oh, no, I don't want to mess with that. It's too much trouble. Hey, is there any way, would you care, can I go ahead and transfer you right now? And you could go ahead and get that trip set up. So just trying to do anything that you can, because you do not want to erode that, level of local match that you are able to raise. They have a little bit of difficulty with their portal, the functionality of their portal, I'll say. You can only view trips 5 days in advance. So what will happen if a client calls in and books a trip, say 2 weeks in advance, you know, they're waiting for us to call them and tell them what time we're going to pick them up. But if we haven't called them, they may call us and say, I have a trip scheduled for April the 1st. Can you tell me what time you're going to pick me up? We can't see that trip yet. Can you go ahead and call us back next week? So that is a little bit of a problem, that they only go 5 days out, that I told you that they send those trips into their link. So again, that's something I wish they could work on a little bit, just because I think we would all like to be able to book out a little further than 5 days. And the flip side of that is too, like on prior approvals, we download those every day after the trip. You can only get those up to 3 days. And so sometimes when there's a Monday holiday and you may not be working that day, there's some juggling that has to go on to be able to get those prior approvals. We have to use those, you know, to put them into our software. So their portal could use just a little bit of help. Billing is a little different from motive care. Billing, you have to kind of bill one trip at a time, and the denied trips aren't brought to our attention. So if we've billed $10 and we're only paid $7, then we've got to kind of look and see, okay, which one didn't pay? Where is that $3 so that we can rebook that denied trip? Very easy to rebook that trip, to send it in again, but it's just identifying which one it is a little bit difficult. Their payment remittance isn't as good as motive care's, because they don't put a client name on there. They only use a trip number. And so you would think that would be obvious, but it's not. So their remittance advice could use just a little help too. The last thing, if I use the word credentials, I would hear, like earlier in 2018 when we were doing this, I would just hear the room would just break out in moans and groans, because when they started, it was a horrific process to get like set up with MTM because of the credentialing that was required. And so it was a common complaint when we first started. I will say we have finally worked with them, and when we first started, we signed an 18-page contract with MTM. And then finally, after a little while, I said, listen, we do the same thing for IDOT. We do the same thing for impact, for public aid. We've already done all this. So then they were able to, at least I was able to like mark through an initial and date, like 3 pages of it. Okay, I don't have to do that anymore. That's great. And then now we are down to hopefully a 4-page letter of agreement. So if you guys are already set up with impact and traditional public aid, if you guys are already doing the things that you need to for IDOT, as long as you can provide that to them, if they were needing to come and audit you at any time, if you can provide that information, then they will allow you to do a letter of agreement, 4 pages, and not have to do all that credentialing that had been originally in that. And then when I say credentialing, we have to do now is when we have a new driver, we go ahead and put that new driver in with his driver's license, any new vehicles that we receive. There is a 1-page disclosure of ownership once a year. And then once a year, we do have to upload our certificate of insurances that show we have auto insurance and workman's comp. And then I think we do have to, once a year, have an attestation of training where we verify, one person signs off, our CEO, COO, somebody signs off and says, yes, I attest that all of our people are properly trained, blah, 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 blah. So it has changed quite a bit. And if you have any difficulty, then just please keep telling them that you already do this information, you already have requirements through IDOT, and hopefully then it's not a big deal as it used to be. So that was kind of a very, very extremely brief overview of Medicaid and the MCOs. I will tell you, RIDES has been billing traditional Medicaid for over 30 years, and we've seen a thing or two. We've seen a lot of changes, and we've adapted to those. We've been through Medicaid audits. We've paid money back, but we've adjusted how we do things. We've been billing the MCOs since they started in 2018, and I will tell you, it was pretty painful at first. But we do now have it to a point where it's a much, much smoother ride. Things have evolved from an everybody pitching in and doing, you know, this, and everybody's doing this, where now I have one central person doing that. She does all my billing for me. She does all the rebilling, any payment verifications for traditional Medicaid, motive care, and MCOs. And she works 30 hours a week, and we do about 2,400 trips a month. And so it is not unattainable for you providers to be able to enroll in these. It's true, though, we do spend a lot of time for something that may only net us $7 for a leg of a trip or $15 for a leg of a trip. But when it's all said and done, it sure does add up, and it is a vital part of what we use for our local match. We are not having our community chicken and dumpling dinners any longer. And I never had to learn how to macrame. So for those things, I am very thankful for the Medicaid transportation in being able to be a vital part of our local match. We have found those other streams to help us. And just like Shelley said in her group earlier, there is a need for, I know there are pockets in Illinois where there are no providers for MCOs. And again, part of it I think was because back in 2018, it was so difficult to become, and it was very new. But I would encourage you that if you are not participating either in state Medicaid, traditional Medicaid, or one or two of the MCOs, that you would go ahead and give it a shot and see. Remember, you know, there's no pain with, you know, there's no gain without any pain, okay? It will be a little difficult at first, I will tell you that, but once you can get it to a manageable point, it will be worth it, and it will be worth the local match. I was talking to someone on break just a little bit ago, and she just said, hey, they finally got paid. I mean, it was a process, but they finally got their MCOs, and I would say a small county, and she said now they are doing $22,000 a month in the Medicaid and MCO transportation. And I was very, very impressed with that. And again, it can go, that can be from a small system all the way up to a larger system. So any questions then on MCOs or anything that I spoke about? I know there's one left. Dave. If a trip needs to be denied, and actually it's just canceled or sent back, okay, is what it is, then we would go ahead and contact motive care if it's motive care and just say we can't do that trip. We really try never to refuse a trip, we'll say it that way. We always will give them a choice. You know, maybe we could go ahead and get you, yeah, like I said, call the doctor's office. Could they be seen at 3 o'clock? You know, something of that. We always try to give them a choice, and we try not to. That's not always available, but we do try to do that. So then if we could not, we would have to call Motive Care, and then they would be that scrambling to try to find a last minute other provider for them. Mhm. Back when they started, that was one of the things that was in that. They called it liquidated damages, that they would be assessed liquidated damages if you had too many return trips or things like that. I will say, we've never been assessed any kind of liquid damage. I don't know if anybody has. I think that may be more of a, I don't want to call it a threat, but something of that nature. Again, I know they have a service to provide to, and they want to do it in a timely manner. Anybody else have a question on MCOs? I'll be around afterwards if anybody wants to talk, or I'll have a card. I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so if you wanted to ask me anything, just kind of after the session would be great. Yes, over here. Okay. Anybody else? Who? Yeah, that's who does it. That first dispatcher of the morning, she's the one that's going to decide if we've got room for that on anything. I don't believe so. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, and your evening can begin. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, everybody. We will resume in the morning with the famous Jeff Waxman. I'm not famous, but I'll talk for a few minutes about TAPCO. And then Jeff is going to talk about reasonable suspicion. I know there's going to be a lot of people signing in online also to watch that. So everybody take care. We'll see you in the morning.
Real quick too, if you are not going to be here tomorrow, if you wouldn't mind filling out the eval sheet and leaving it on the tables, because we do use those when planning for next year. So if you're not going to be here tomorrow, don't mind doing that. Please leave it on the table. Thank you.
Those are the last two sheets in your book, I think, the last three sheets.